This is the Tank Magazine podcast. I'm Jan Peter Westhead. In this episode, we are going to hear Madeline Miller reading from her new novel Circe, and then talk a little about the book. Miller's first novel, The Songs of Achilles, won the 2012 Orange Prize, and Circe offers another fresh take on Greek mythology, this time centering on the powerful sorceress most often remembered for turning men into pigs in Homer's Odyssey.
This first passage comes from towards the beginning of the novel. Circe is the daughter of the sun god Helios, but she is also the first witch in Western literature when she appears in the Odyssey. So in this passage, she is discovering her witchcraft on her island of Aiaia, and her witchcraft is distinct from her divinity. It's something she makes as opposed to what she was born. Let me say what sorcery is not. It is not divine power which comes with a thought and a blink. It must be made and worked, planned and searched out, dug up, dried, chopped and ground, cooked, spoken over, and sung. Even after all that, it can fail as gods do not. If my herbs are not fresh enough, if my attention falters, if my will is weak, the draughts go stale and rancid in my hands. By rights, I should never have come to witchcraft. Gods hate all toil. It is their nature. The closest we come is weaving or smithing, but these things are skills, and there is no drudgery to them, since all the parts that might be unpleasant are taken away with power. The wool is dyed not with stinking vats and stirring spoons, but with a snap. There is no tedious mining. The oars leap willing from the mountain. No fingers are ever chafed, no muscles strained. Witchcraft is nothing but such drudgery. Each herb must be found in its den, harvested at its time, grubbed up from the dirt, culled and stripped, washed and prepared. It must be handled this way, then that, to find out where its power lies. Day upon patient day, you must throw out your errors and begin again. So why did I not mind? Why did none of us mind? I cannot speak for my brothers and sister, but my answer is easy. For 100 generations I had walked the world drowsy and dull, idle and at my ease. I left no prints, I did no deeds. Even those who had loved me a little did not care to stay. Then I learned that I could bend the world to my will, as a bow is bent for an arrow. I would have done that toil 1,000 times to keep such power in my hands. I thought, this is how Zeus felt when he first lifted the thunderbolt. It was one day during that time that I found myself among the thickest brakes of the forest. I loved to walk the island from its lowest shores to its highest haunts, seeking out the hidden mosses and ferns and vines, collecting their leaves for my charms. It was late afternoon and my basket overflowed. I stepped around a bush and the boar was there. I had known for some time that there were wild pigs on the island. I'd heard them, squealing and crashing in the brush, and often I would find some rhododendron trampled, or a stand of saplings rooted up. This was the first one I had ever seen. He was huge, even bigger than I had imagined a boar could be. His spine rose steep and black as the ridges of Mount Kinthus, and his shoulders were slashed with the thunderbolt scars of his fights. Only the bravest heroes face such creatures, and then they are armed with spears and dogs, archers and assistants, and usually 6 warriors besides. I had only my digging knife and my basket, and not a single spell draft to hand. He stamped, and the white foam dripped from his mouth. He lowered his tusks and ground his jaws. His pig eyes said, I can break 100 youths and send their bodies back to wailing mothers. I will tear your entrails and eat them for my lunch. I fixed my gaze on his. Try, I said. For a long moment he stared at me. Then he turned and twitched off through the brush. I tell you, for all my spells, that was the first time I truly felt myself a witch. At my hearth that night, I thought of those prancing goddesses who carry birds on their shoulders, or have some fawn always nuzzling their hands, tripping delicately at their heels. I would put them to shame, I thought. I climbed to the highest peaks and found a lonely track. Here a flower crushed, Here the dirt turned a little and some bark clawed off. I brewed a potion with crocus and yellow jasmine, iris and cypress root dug at the moon's full height. I sprinkled it, singing, I summon you. She came rippling through my door at the next dusk, her shoulder muscles hard as stones. She lay across my hearth and rasped my ankles with her tongue. During the day, she brought me rabbits and fish. At night, she licked honey from my fingers and slept upon my feet. Sometimes we would play, she stalking behind me, then leaping up to grapple me by the neck. I smelled the hot musk of her breath, felt the weight of her forepaws pressing on my shoulders. Look, I said, showing her the knife I had carried with me from my father's halls, the one stamped with a lion's face. What fool made this? They have never seen your like. She cracked her great brown mouth in a yawn. There was a bronze mirror in my bedroom, tall as the ceiling. When I passed it, I scarcely knew myself. My gaze seemed brighter, my face sharper, and there behind me paced my wild lion familiar. I could imagine what my cousins would say if they saw me, my feet dirty from working in the garden, my skirts knotted up around my knees, singing at the height of my frail voice. I wished that they would come. I wanted to see those goggle eyes of theirs as I walked among the dens of wolves, swam in the sea where the sharks fed. I could change a fish to a bird. I could wrestle with my lion, then lie across her belly, my hair loose around me. I wanted to hear them squeal and gasp, breath struck. Oh, she looked at me. Now I will be a frog. Had I truly feared such creatures? Had I really spent 10,000 years ducking like a mouse? I understood now Oetes' boldness, how he had stood before our father like a towering peak. When I did my magics, I felt that same span and heft. I tracked my father's burning chariot across the sky. Well, what do you have to say to me? You threw me to the crows, but it turns out I prefer them to you. No answer came, and none from my Aunt Moon either, those cowards. My skin was glowing, my teeth set. My lioness lashed her tail. Does no one have the courage? Will no one dare to face me? So you see, in my way, I was eager for what came. This passage comes from the middle of the novel after Circe has already started transforming men into pigs, and the he in the passage is Odysseus. He asked me once, why pigs? We were seated before my hearth in our usual chairs. He liked the one draped in cowhide with silver inlaid in its carvings. Sometimes he would rub the scrolling absently beneath his thumb. Why not? I said. He gave me a bare smile. I mean it, I would like to know. I knew he meant it. He was not a pious man, but the seeking out of things hidden, this was his highest worship. There were answers in me. I felt them buried deep as last year's bulbs growing fat. Their roots tangled with those moments I had spent against the wall, when my lions were gone and my spells shut up inside me. After I changed a crew, I would watch them scrabbling and crying in the sty, falling over each other, stupid with their horror. They hated it all, their newly voluptuous flesh, their delicate split trotters, their swollen bellies dragging in the earth muck. It was a humiliation, a debasement. They were sick with longing for their hands, those appendages men use to mitigate the world. Come, I would say to them, it's not that bad. You should appreciate a pig's advantages. Mud slick and swift, they are hard to catch. Low to the ground, they cannot easily be knocked over. They are not like dogs, they do not need your love. They can thrive anywhere, on anything, scraps and trash. They look witless and dull, which lulls their enemies, but they are clever. They will remember your face. They never listened. The truth is, men make terrible pigs.
Thank you so much for coming today, Madeline, and for those two lovely readings. What was it about the character of Circe that made you want to write the book?
What drew me to Circe was her complexity. there are not very many female characters like her in the ancient mythology who are able to have independence and not end up punished for it by the end of their story. Circe has gotten a really bad reputation, I think, in popular culture. She's often sort of portrayed as the man-hater. She turns men to pigs. That's what everyone remembers. Of course, it's pretty memorable. And, she's seen as the witch and the villain and the temptress who lures Odysseus. But if you look at Homer, that's actually not who she is. Yes, she does turn Odysseus's men into pigs, but once she and Odysseus come to an understanding, she ends up being one of the most helpful divinities that he comes across. She keeps him on her island for a year while he rests and recovers himself. He arrives on her island exhausted and grieving. He's lost all his ships except for one and seen his men, killed and eaten by the Cyclops. And so she is able to bring him into her house and kind of give him a place of rest, a haven. And at the end of the year, he actually doesn't even want to go. So that was interesting to me, too, that she goes from being this menacing figure to this incredibly benevolent, healing figure. So her power is both a harmful one and a healing one, and she uses both of those things in the context of the Odyssey. So I was drawn to that complexity, that gray area is built in. I was also really drawn to her because we see so little of her. We get almost no internal life from her. Why is she turning men to pigs? Homer doesn't tell us, and Odysseus doesn't ask her. So I really wanted to explore that from kind of a three-dimensional psychological perspective. I think people do things for a reason, so what is the reason behind that? So that was something that I wanted to trace throughout. And, Odysseus is a wonderful character to write about, and I love working with him. He was in, both novels at different points in his life. He's a much younger man in the Song of Achilles, and then in Circe, you get to see him when he's more exhausted and ground down and after the war, and all he wants to do is get home. But he has also had a lot of airtime over the years, and so part of what I wanted to do with Circe is really keep the camera on her, as opposed to making her an obstacle, a cameo in his story, the male traditional heroic narrative. He instead becomes the cameo in her story, and she has this whole life that has absolutely nothing to do with him, which is all, again, built into the mythology. She is, as I said, the daughter of the sun god Helios. She's also the aunt of the Minotaur and Medea. She's cousin to Prometheus. So she has all these connections with other Greek myths that are really completely outside her role in the Odyssey.
It was really enjoyable following Circe from childhood up to sort of becoming this figure from the Odyssey. You call Circe the first witch in Western literature. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little.
Sure. Well, that is always fascinating because I think witchcraft is been such a fraught part of history. As I dove into what it meant to be a witch, as well as the first witch, what it really seemed to boil down to me is that a witch is the word that we give a woman who has more power than we think she should have. That it really is about sort of trying to put a powerful woman back in her place or trying to vilify her and kind of cast her out. What's shocking to me about the word witch is how powerful it still is. If you Google any major female politician of any persuasion and the word witch, you will find a whole rabbit hole of images and memes and articles. And so that's really interesting too, that this, we've been calling women witches for millennia, and we still are.
The book's been described as a feminist retelling, one that sort of resonates a lot with things that are going on today, with Me Too and things like that. Was that something you were conscious of when you were writing the novel?
Well, I started the novel 7 years ago, so all the recent attention that's been getting, which I think is wonderful, was not on the radar when I started working. I absolutely wanted it to be a feminist take, but I also think that putting a woman at the center of the story shouldn't necessarily have to be feminist. It should just be normal. That women should be given the same scope that men have had for years in these stories. And one of the things that I really wanted to do with Circe was to take a woman's life, which has traditionally been deemed not interesting enough for epic, and really explore all the parts of her life, which in Circe's case, involve her growing up and falling in love, and she becomes a mother at one point in the story, and all these, she has a very close female friendship She loves to weave. These things are pieces that traditionally were shut out or people weren't interested in. But instead, I wanted to really bring them to the forefront.
Do you situate what you do with other writers? I'm thinking of Anne Carson or Emily Wilson's new translation of the Odyssey. Seems to be a kind of moment where writers are addressing stories that have been overlooked in the past. Do you think that's something that's happening, or is it a coincidence?
No, I absolutely think that there's a movement towards kind of looking for the other voices in the story. I love both those women that you named. Anne Carson and Emily Wilson are both terrific, brilliant classicists and brilliant, writers in their own right. Emily Wilson, I think, is a wonderful example of bringing those other voices to light, and not just female voices. She does explore Penelope in a wonderful way and sort of bring out these little hidden pieces of her personality that have been kind of buried in the layers of translation. But the other thing she does is she addresses the slavery issue head on. There are all these ancient Greek words for slave, and oftentimes they get translated in much softer ways in translation. So, they're not female house slaves, but they're maids or they're handmaids, or, there are all these words that kind of obscure. And I think when modern readers read that, unless they know, they just assume that, these are paid people who come in, these are friends of Penelope, but no, these are slaves. And I think that she really brings that out by translating those words as slaves, to kind of not sugarcoat this time period.
It fascinates me how Greek mythology or the culture of ancient Greece still feels so relevant to our lives, and it kind of always has done in Western history. We've constantly returned to this culture and found something there that we can relate to. Why do you think that is? Can you give any reasons for why you think that might be?
I think that these ancient poets and writers and philosophers too, these were very deep thinkers, and they really devoted themselves to understanding human nature and the human mind and the human heart. And I think that they really understood a lot of that and were able to express it beautifully in poetry and in literature. And so I think that just continues to resonate. Culture has changed, but some of these eternal human truths about the way we love and grieve and go to war and hope and desire, all those things remain the same. I think it's also interesting to look at how ancient philosophies across the world can sort of speak to each other. Epicureanism, which later came to have a very bad reputation, but in the ancient world, Virgil and Horace, the two great Golden Age Roman poets, were both Epicureans. I think resonates with Buddhism also, that there's, that when we kind of look at across the spectrum of human experience, we see a lot of these same ideas coming up, not just in Western culture, but all over.
To hear more podcasts from Tank Magazine, be sure to subscribe on the iTunes Store or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast was taken from Kate Simcoe and the London Electronic Orchestra.